The Blackwood Ridge did not welcome visitors. It merely tolerated them until the cold set in. Jason Vance adjusted the heavy nylon straps of his backpack, feeling the damp bite of the late autumn air seep through his technical jacket. He had chosen this remote stretch of northern wilderness precisely because the maps of the area were notoriously unreliable, marked only by dotted lines that faded into blank green expanses. Rumors clung to Blackwood like the thick, grey lichen draping from the hemlocks, whispers of experienced hunters entering the brush and leaving behind nothing but empty tents and neatly folded clothes. Jason, a seasoned cartographer and seasoned solo hiker, had laughed off the local superstitions at the Trailhead Diner 3 days ago. Now, with the sun dipping below the jagged tree line and painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, those rumors felt less like folklore and more like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. The silence here was absolute, lacking even the rhythmic chirping of crickets or the distant rustle of foraging rodents. It was a dead zone, a pocket of the world where nature seemed to hold its breath in perpetual anticipation. He stopped beside a massive, lightning-scarred oak to consult his GPS, only to find the screen cycling through a frantic, meaningless loop of coordinates. "Of course," Jason muttered, his voice sounding thin and startlingly loud in the vast quiet. He tapped the glass, but the device remained dead, its battery drained from full to empty in less than an hour of walking. He slipped it into his pocket, relying instead on his mechanical compass, though even its needle seemed sluggish, trembling as if reluctant to point north. His goal was the old fire lookout tower, perched on the northern ridge, a sturdy concrete and iron structure built in the 1950s that promised shelter and a vantage point to plan his exit. The tower was also his anchor to safety. He knew a decommissioned logging road, still passable by heavy-duty vehicles, lay just 2 miles east of it, offering a direct path back to the highway. With darkness pooling rapidly in the hollows of the forest floor, he quickened his pace, his boots crunching over frozen leaves and brittle twigs. As the last remnants of daylight vanished, Jason felt the uncanny sensation of eyes on the back of his neck. It wasn't the sudden sharp alarm of a nearby predator, but rather a cold, calculating gaze that seemed to drift down from the upper canopy. He stopped, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, and shone his tactical flashlight into the branches above. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating thick boughs of pine and hemlock, but revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, the feeling of being watched persisted, accompanied by a faint, sickly sweet odor that smelled vaguely of overripe fruit and copper. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, telling himself that the isolation was simply playing tricks on his mind. "Just a few more miles," he whispered, his breath pluming in the freezing air like white smoke. He began to walk again, but this time he caught the distinct sound of a second pair of footsteps matching his own, stepping a split second after he did. Every time Jason paused to listen, the phantom footsteps ceased instantly, perfectly synchronized with his movements. It was a terrifying game of mimicry, designed to make him doubt his own senses and drive him into a panic. The intelligence behind it was clear. This was not an animal acting on raw instinct, but a patient hunter studying its prey, measuring his stamina and his fear. Jason refused to run, knowing that showing weakness would only invite an attack, so he kept a steady, measured pace, his eyes darting to the left and right. The forest seemed to grow denser, the trees crowding closer together as if trying to funnel him toward a specific path. The air grew progressively colder, dropping well below freezing in a matter of minutes, coating the surrounding pine needles in a delicate layer of hoarfrost. Through the thick trunks ahead, the skeletal silhouette of the fire lookout tower finally emerged, rising like a beacon of salvation against the starless night sky. Relief surged through him, but it was quickly tempered by a sudden, jarring sound that echoed through the trees. It was a voice, thin, reedy, and chillingly familiar. "Jason, help me. I'm lost." The voice sounded exactly like his younger brother Marcus, who was currently safe at home in Chicago, thousands of miles away. The imitation was incredibly precise, catching the exact pitch and cadence of Marcus's voice, yet there was a hollow mechanical quality to it, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Jason froze, a cold dread washing over him as he realized the sheer malice of the entity tracking him. It was digging into his memories, using his own loved ones as bait to lure him into the darkness. He gripped his flashlight tighter, refusing to look back, and sprinted the final 100 yards toward the base of the tower. He scrambled up the creaking metal stairs, his boots clanking loudly in the night, until he reached the heavy iron door on the cabin at the top. He threw himself inside, slammed the door shut, and slid the heavy deadbolt into place, collapsing against the cold metal as the wind began to howl outside. The interior of the fire lookout tower was a frozen capsule of a bygone era, smelling of dry rot, rusted iron, and decades of stagnant dust. Jason stood frozen against the heavy steel door, his chest heaving as he listened to the wind clawing at the exterior safety glass. Outside, the darkness was absolute, swallowing the surrounding pines so completely that the tower felt like an island floating in a void of black velvet. He flicked his flashlight around the single room, illuminating a rusted iron stove, a warped wooden desk, a metal cot stripped bare to the springs, and an old-fashioned circular map table in the center. The silence inside was thick, broken only by the rhythmic metallic ticking of the cooling stove as the temperature in the cabin continued to plummet. Jason walked hesitantly to the map table, brushing away a thick layer of grime to reveal a hand-drawn topographical map of Blackwood Ridge. Red ink circled several coordinates throughout the forest, each marked with a single, chilling word: gone. His eyes widened as he realized this wasn't just a standard forestry map, but a record of the disappearances that had plagued the valley for over half a century. Shivering violently, Jason dropped his heavy pack onto the floor and forced himself to focus on immediate survival. He needed heat, light, and a plan to reach the logging road at dawn. He approached the desk, pulling open the swollen wooden drawers until he found a rusted, hand-crank emergency radio on a thick, leather-bound logbook. The logbook's cover was stained with water damage. The gold lettering of the U.S. Forestry Service faded to a dull, barely legible yellow. He flipped it open to the final entries, dated October 1974, written in the frantic, trembling handwriting of a ranger named Arthur Pendleton. It's been circling the tower for 3 days, one entry read, the ink smeared as if written in a hurry. It doesn't eat the flesh to survive, it eats the mind, hollows you out until you want to open the door. Jason felt a drop of sweat run down his temple despite the freezing temperature of the room. The old legends call it the Wendigo, born of greed and starvation, but it is no mindless beast, the diary continued on the next page. It is ancient, patient, and it cannot cross a threshold sealed with the old-growth mountain ash and iron. I have bound the lower hatch, but I can hear my wife's voice calling from the forest floor, and I know I cannot hold out much longer. A sudden deafening shriek tore through the night, rattling the heavy glass panes of the lookout tower. It was a sound that began as the high-pitched wail of a dying child and transitioned seamlessly into the deep, agonizing groan of tearing metal. Jason dropped the logbook, his hands shaking so violently that his flashlight slipped from his grip, rolling across the floorboards and casting long, erratic shadows up the walls. He scrambled to retrieve the light, his eyes locked on the ceiling hatch above him. Above the wind, he could hear the distinct, heavy thud of something landing on the flat roof of the tower. The structural steel groaned under an immense, unnatural weight, the vibrations traveling down the metal supports and vibrating through the soles of Jason's boots. Whatever was up there was incredibly heavy, yet its movements were impossibly stealthy, shifting across the tin roof with a slow, deliberate scrape of long, yellowed talons. "Jason, please open up. It's cold out here." The voice came from directly above, filtering down through the ventilation shaft in a soft, weeping whisper. This time the voice was not his brother's, but his mother's, soft, nurturing and layered with a desperate, heartbreaking sorrow. The mimicry was terrifyingly perfect, complete with the subtle, breathy pauses she always made when she was on the verge of tears. "You're not her," Jason whispered, backing away from the center of the room until his spine pressed against the cold glass of the window. "You are a monster, and you cannot come in." The voice on the roof ceased instantly, replaced by a low, vibrating growl that resonated through the very structure of the cabin. The creature began to circle the exterior catwalk, its heavy claws clicking against the metal grating of the wraparound balcony. Through the frosted glass of the eastern window, Jason saw a shape pass by, a towering, skeletal silhouette that stood nearly 8 feet tall, with unnaturally long limbs that bent at sickening angles. The creature stopped directly outside the eastern window, its form obscured by the darkness and the frost, but its eyes were visible. They were twin pinpricks of pale, milky white light, devoid of pupils, burning with a cold, mocking intelligence that seemed to peer straight through Jason's skull. Jason felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to reach the brass deadbolt on the window, his hand moving forward as if pulled by invisible strings. His mind filled with a heavy, suffocating fog, and for a fleeting second, the terrifying entity outside looked like a warm, welcoming heart. He shook his head violently, biting his tongue until the sharp tang of blood filled his mouth. The pain shattered the hypnotic trance just in time. He stumbled backward, his hand brushing against the logbook on the desk, his mind racing as he realized He had to find whatever Arthur Pendleton had used to protect himself. If the old ranger had managed to survive even a few days, there had to be some remnant of his defense left behind in the dark corners of this iron cage. The sight of those emaciated ash-colored fingers gripping the dry rotted wood of the windowsill sent a jolt of primal terror straight to Jason's core. The hand did not grasp wildly. Instead, the long black talons tapped a slow, rhythmic pattern against the sill, mimicking the sound of a ticking clock. From the black abyss outside the open window, a face slowly drifted into the dim glow of the rolling flashlight. It was a grotesque mockery of a human visage, its skin stretched so impossibly tight over a hollow skull that the white of the bone shone through. Sunken, lidless eyes burned with a cold, pale yellow light, staring at Jason with a terrifyingly human intelligence. The creature's jaw was unnaturally elongated, lined with jagged, yellowed teeth that parted to let out a low, wet hiss. "You are so tired, Jason," the entity whispered, this time using Jason's own voice, perfectly replicated but distorted by a wet, clicking sound in its throat. "Just let me in, and we can rest together in the quiet." The psychological weight of hearing his own voice beg for surrender threatened to paralyze him, but the survival instinct that had kept him alive of dozens solo expeditions kicked in. He scrambled backward across the dusty floorboards, his hand frantically sweeping the dark until his fingers brushed against the cold, heavy metal of the desk's bottom drawer. He yanked it open, his knuckles scraping against the rusted tracks, and his hand closed around a heavy, solid iron fire poker left behind by the long-forgotten ranger. Recalling the logbook's desperate warning about the purifying nature of cold iron, Jason gripped the rusted handle with both hands, his knuckles turning white. The Wendigo began to drag its skeletal torso through the narrow window frame, the bones of its shoulders popping and clicking with sickening flexibility as it squeezed inside. A wave of intense freezing cold washed over the room, bringing with it a stench of decay so thick that Jason had to choke back a gag. With a desperate, guttural scream, Jason lunged forward, swinging the heavy iron poker with all the strength his terrified body could muster. The rusted iron struck the creature's protruding wrist with a dull, heavy clang that echoed like a cracked bell. A sound like shattering glass and burning flesh hissed into the air as the Wendigo let out a piercing, ear-splitting shriek of genuine agony. The black flesh, where the iron had made contact, instantly blackened and blistered, releasing a wisp of foul-smelling grey smoke. The creature recoiled violently, its grip slipping from the windowsill as it tumbled backward into the freezing dark of the forest canopy below. Seizing the fleeting window of opportunity, Jason rushed forward, grabbed the wooden sash of the northern window, and slammed it shut with a resounding bang. He reached out, grabbed the heavy steel shutter, and yanked it across the glass, throwing his entire body weight against it until the iron bolt slid into its locked position. The cabin was instantly plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness, save for the weak, flickering beam of his flashlight on the floor. He retrieved the light, his hands shaking so violently that the beam danced erratically across the iron-reinforced walls. Outside, a furious, inhuman roar echoed through the trees, a sound of pure rage and frustrated hunger that made the very foundations of the tower shudder. Jason collapsed against the desk, clutching the iron poker to his chest like a lifeline, his heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm. He knew he had won a temporary reprieve, but the heavy thuds vibrating through the floorboards told him the creature was not giving up. It was circling the base of the tower, its sharp talons scraping against the metal support beams with a screeching sound that set his teeth on edge. "Think, Jason, think," he muttered to himself, desperately shining his light back onto the old ranger's logbook in search of permanent solution. He flipped through the remaining pages with trembling fingers, searching for anything that would help him survive the long night ahead. Near the very back of the book, tucked into a hidden leather pocket, his fingers brushed against a piece of folded heavy parchment and a cold, heavy object. He pulled them out, revealing a hand-drawn map of the ridge and a remarkably heavy, hand-forged iron spike etched with intricate ancient geometric runes. The ranger's last entry was written in a surprisingly steady hand, as if he had accepted his fate but wanted to leave a weapon for whoever came next. The Wendigo cannot be truly killed by mortal hands, but it can be bound and put to sleep if its heart is pierced with the word of the ridge. The text read, "The word is the hand-forged spike of meteoric iron, blessed by the hands of those who first walked these woods. You must lure it into the open, wait for the moment it tries to consume your mind, and drive the spike directly into its frozen chest." Jason stared at the runic spike in his hand, feeling a strange, subtle warmth radiating from the ancient metal, contrasting sharply with the freezing air of the cabin. The hand-drawn map showed a clear, dashed trail leading from the base of the tower straight to the old logging road, marked with the words, "The safe path, Ironwood line." Suddenly, a terrifyingly loud splintering sound erupted from above him. The creature had stopped scraping the metal supports and had climbed onto the roof, its heavy uneven steps shifting the rusted tin panels overhead. It knew the iron shutters barred its way through the windows, and now it was intelligently seeking a weak point from above, peeling back the roof tiles with its razor-sharp claws. Dust and flakes of rust rained down on Jason's head as a cold draft began to whistle through the widening crack in the ceiling. He realized with absolute clarity that he could not afford to play a waiting game in this metal cage. He had to face the beast on his own terms. He slipped the runic iron spike into his jacket pocket, gripping the heavy poker in his right hand, and took a deep, steadying breath. The time for hiking was over. If he wanted to see the sunrise, he would have to execute a desperate, high-stakes escape down the mountain. The metal ceiling groaned under the creature's immense weight. The sharp screech of tearing tin echoed through the cabin like the cry of a dying animal. Jason did not wait for the roof to cave in completely. Instead, he threw his entire weight against the iron door's deadbolt, wrenching it free with a sharp, echoing clack. He surged out into the howling sub-zero wind, his heavy boots flying down the rusted metal steps of the tower as a massive crash erupted in the room behind him. Looking back over his shoulder, he saw the Wendigo's skeletal form drop through the shattered roof, its yellow, lidless eyes immediately locking onto his fleeing figure with predatory focus. With an inhuman gravity-defying leap, the beast vaulted from the high platform, landing with a heavy, sickening thud on the frozen forest floor below, its joints popping back into place instantly. Jason hit the ground running, his flashlight beam cutting a frantic, erratic path through the towering dark trunks of the ancient trees. The hand-drawn map was burnt into his mind, 2 miles to the old logging road, along a straight path flanked by ancient, iron-rich birch trees that the ranger had marked as the Ironwood line. The creature pursued him with terrifying, fluid speed, moving not like an animal but like a living shadow leaping from tree to tree, always just a single step behind. "Jason, please stop running. We're so close to the end." His own voice echoed from the darkness to his left, followed instantly by the sobbing voice of his mother from the right. He refused to listen, shutting out the psychological assault by focusing entirely on the rhythmic, heavy thud of his boots and the reassuring weight of the runic spike bouncing against his chest. The air grew increasingly thick and frigid, the frost on the surrounding branches shimmering like broken glass under his sweeping flashlight beam. As he crested a steep rocky ridge, his foot caught on a concealed pine root, sending him tumbling headfirst down a steep, snowy embankment. He crashed hard into a drift of frozen leaves, his flashlight flying from his grip and burying itself deep in the snow, leaving him in a near-total darkness. Before he could scramble to his feet, a heavy freezing weight slammed into his back, pinning him directly to the cold earth and knocking the breath from his lungs. The sickeningly sweet stench of rot and copper washed over him as the Wendigo's skeletal fingers wrapped around his neck, its sharp black talons pressing lightly against his throat. "You cannot escape the ridge, Jason," the creature hissed, its face hovering inches from his own, its hollow breath smelling of ancient dust and decay. The pale yellow light in its sunken eyes flared, and Jason felt a sudden, crushing wave of despair wash over his mind, a final mental attack designed to make him surrender his will to live. Images of his family, mourning his mysterious disappearance, flashed through his thoughts, tempting him to simply close his eyes and let the freezing darkness take him. "No," Jason gasped, his voice barely a whisper but his internal resolve hardening as he fought against the overwhelming illusion. With a final desperate burst of strength, he slipped his right hand into his jacket pocket, his fingers wrapping around the warm metallic surface of the runic iron spike. He swung his arm upward in a blind, powerful arc, driving the heavy meteoric iron spike directly into the center of the creature's emaciated, leathery chest. The moment the ancient hand forged metal pierced the grey flesh, a blinding blue-white spark erupted from the contact point with a loud pop. The Wendigo let out a sound that was no longer human, a deafening metallic shriek of pure agony that shook the snow from the surrounding hemlocks. The ancient geometric runes carved into the spike flared with a brilliant golden light, spreading like glowing molten metal across the creature's chest and limbs. The golden light formed a web of burning, ethereal chains wrapped tightly around the beast's skeletal torso and pinning its clawed arms firmly to its sides. The Wendigo collapsed heavily beside Jason, its yellow eyes flickering wildly as the golden energy slowly turned its leathery, grey flesh into solid, unmoving stone. Jason scrambled backward through the snow, gasping for air, watching in absolute awe as the legendary predator was slowly and completely bound by the ancient ward. Within moments, the creature's writhing body became a silent, moss-covered basalt statue, frozen mid-shriek in the middle of the dark forest. The oppressive, unnatural chill that had hung over the woods instantly began to dissipate, replaced by the natural crisp cold of a normal autumn night. Jason stood up on trembling, exhausted legs, his body aching from the fall and the struggle, but his mind clearer than it had been in days. He retrieved his flashlight, brushing the packed snow off the lens, and shined it one last time on the bound stone guardian of the Blackwood Ridge. The forest was no longer silent. The distant reassuring hoot of a horned owl echoed through the canopy, signaling that the unnatural dead zone had finally been broken. He turned away from the statue and walked confidently toward the east, following the natural boundary of the iron line as the first faint rays of dawn began to paint the horizon in pale pink and gold. 20 minutes later, his boots stepped onto the cracked, overgrown asphalt of the old logging road, the wide open sky stretching out before him like a promise of survival. He looked back one final time at the dark canopy of Blackwood Ridge, knowing he was the first person to ever walk out of those deep woods alive. He knew the stone warden would hold the beast for generations to come, keeping the dark legend of the Wendigo safely bound beneath the whispering pines. Smiling through his immense exhaustion, Jason pocketed his compass and began his long, peaceful walk back to home.